Yeah, for everyone who has joined, thank you for joining this webinar. We're going to be talking about the very exciting and controversial topic of energy permitting and the role that AI plays in it. And actually, I'm not sure. Um, and Yeah, so very excited to be hosting this. We have a lot of different perspectives on the call, and I'm just going to kind of launch us with a springboard question. And the springboard question is as follows: Tell us about an AI initiative that you guys are personally championing right now, and would love to hear, what it is that you're championing, and how you decided that this particular initiative became a priority over other things that you're working on. So, Aaron, maybe we can start with you and have you kind of share a little bit about yourself, what your role is, and something that you're working on right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Aaron Levine. I'm the Senior Legal Regulatory Analyst at the National Lab of the Rockies, formerly the National Renewable Energy Lab. I've been with the lab just over 14 years now. And then I also just rolled off this last year of a two-year appointment as the American Bar Association's Energy Law Chair. So I'm still very actively involved with the ABA's section of Energy, Environment, and Resources. For me, something that I've been working on a lot is using AI as a tool to collect data. For example, we started back in 2018 at the lab looking at wind and solar zoning ordinances at the county and municipal level. I hired multiple summer legal interns to spend an entire summer combing through one by one every county in the country to look for wind and solar data. We produced a data set. People said, "Hey, we'd like you to add this to the data set," or "We'd like you to do this again every 3 months." And it just wasn't feasible to spend 1,500 person hours every few months reviewing regulations at the local level across the country. We spent a couple years trying to figure out how we do this, and then as AI applications emerged, we were able to develop a web scraper and extraction tool. And so we currently now search over 10,000 jurisdictions in the United States for wind, solar. We've actually expanded this work to now include geothermal, transmission. We're going to be adding data centers later this year and natural gas infrastructure. So we're really doing this more holistically now because we don't have to spend 1,500 person hours looking for this information. Surprising to me, it doesn't happen instantly with an AI tool. It still takes time to run, and you need your tokens and all of that. And so it still might take 2 or 3 weeks to develop and curate a data set. But the ability to have a tool that can search that many jurisdictions, organize the data into the format you want it in, and we actually go a step further and we have it organize it into a machine readable format that can be easily translated into a geospatial layer. And then we can add that geospatial layer to our other tools to analyze what are the impacts of these ordinances, what are the trends, where are they popping up, and then we can do it much more frequently because of that. And so, these are the type of applications that I think at this point are, AI is ripe for in providing that type of support and kind of research support. It more or less has become my research assistant in this regard. And so that's something I'm excited about, seeing it expand and being able to analyze what these trends look like. And then ideally, what we're hoping to be able to do next is then also add that sentiment analysis piece of being able to use AI to also search, social media, newspaper clippings, et cetera, to figure out what are the issues driving, development concerns or development favorability. How can we pair that up with ordinances and regulations that are being passed? So again, being able to process mass amounts of data relatively quickly has been a very nice addition to our team.
Is this the data set that you've worked on? What's the status of kind of being production ready, and who's using it? Is it internal? Have you opened it up for external
Yeah,
parties to access it?
great question. So we will be rolling out a web platform by the end of this summer that has a built-in data viewer and the ability to download all of the data sets, both kind of in a Excel format as well as the geospatial package, so you could run it through your own ArcGIS and things like that. Our previous data sets, the last manual data sets we released in 2022 were downloaded about 16,000 unique times. So we saw pretty broad usage of those. We just released the wind and solar data sets kind of end of calendar 25, beginning of 2026. We've probably seen somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 downloads so far of those two data sets. Again, we have these other data sets with geothermal and transmission in progress that'll be available this summer. And our goal really is we're currently using a website called ODI, the Open Energy Data Initiative. It's a DOE funded initiative to host the data, but we will be migrating this over to a dedicated platform where you'll be able to see the data across technologies, download all the data for your own use. And so stay tuned. It's called Compass, which stands for the Continuous Ordnance Mapping for Planning and Siting Systems. Just remember Compass, it's easier. But be on the lookout. We'll be doing a lot of dissemination around that this summer.
Yeah, Ross, would love to hear from your side.
Yep.
What is it that you're championing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ross Bellotti, and I'm the National Policy Director at SWCA Environmental Consultants. We are about a 2,000 person environmental consultancy that has a presence in all 50 states and a couple of U.S. territories. I was a career Fed, spanning the EPA, National Marine Fisheries Service, one of the first employees at the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. I stood up the CHIPS Program Office environmental team within the Department of Commerce, did a brief stint in Formula One, and then found my way into consulting. And so that should give you the background that I have a very unique perspective on not only this, but also on energy permitting as a whole. Um, One of the things that I am helping to champion within our own firm is our Microsoft Copilot pilot program. So we stood up a cohort of staff across the firm. We're about a third of the way through the pilot, and we're actively gathering feedback on what's working for us, not only as consultants, but also what is working with our clients as well. This is a structured cohort, not just handing out licensing and kind of hoping for the best. AI adoption, we've learned, doesn't happen through osmosis. If you don't build the program intentionally, you're going to get between 10 and 15% of staff using it and the rest that don't. Really, what we're focused on first is general productivity, with a really good, deliberate mixed use case stuck in there so that we can see what sticks before prescribing specific workflows for our consultants and scientists. The biggest barrier so far that we've realized is not what tool or what LLM you're using, but the prompting literacy. We have had to teach our staff from ground zero to learn how to ask good questions before they see real value. Really, where we're trying to, I'll say, get our wins from right now are from summarization and first draft generation right now. That we're starting at the ground level, right? It's harder to get traction on anything requiring firm-specific context, especially when only a few of us have true frontier or co-working capabilities right now. But that being said, there's also a legitimate institutional nervousness about things like client and government confidentiality when you are both a first party and a third party consultant. Data security is another massive one we're dealing with at a firm-wide pace. And then really managing both ends of the adoption spectrum. Some senior staff are skeptical of it right now. Some junior staff are apparently over reliant on it. And that's the actual work here, is how we translate all of this from a pilot project into how we permit these projects better utilizing AI in there. And that's an actual challenge that we're coming up with right now.
And so I think all enterprises these days are talking about, how to accelerate AI adoption. And it sounds like I think there tend to be two different strategies. One is kind of a let 1,000 flowers bloom strategy of, hey, we'll give you guys the seats and licenses and just go at it and experiment. There's another strategy that's maybe more targeted. Hey, we're going to pick this workflow that we know we really want to invest in and automate. It sounds a little bit like you're in the kind of opportunistic let 1,000 flowers bloom camp. Is that fair to say, or how would you describe like the way you're thinking about picking something specific versus letting experimentation flourish?
I would say that for a majority of the firm, we are there. For a select subset of our subject matter experts, my policy team included, we are going a bit further than that and we are allowing really creative freedom and how we can use these to best support our clients and our projects that we're working on. That being said, I think we've come up with about four solidified challenges on getting this stuff to land. The first is obviously adoption, so what we had talked about. Technology limits is the second one. These LLMs hallucinate things in our world all the time, and that's fatal in a compliance context, especially when you have to have an administrative record that is so hard and tight within itself that it can't be brought to challenge, that you really do have to have a human in the loop throughout the entire process. And then the last two are institutional pushback. A lot of agencies really aren't set up right now to look at the scale of the work that AI is pushing out right now. And then the second part of that, which is sort of I loop this all into the unanticipated effects, which are data quality. There's just not a lot of data out there that's machine readable, is what we're finding, especially when it's coming out of the public sector. I use the FERC docket as a very unique and we'll call it narrow example of this. AI has a very hard time searching the FERC docket and finding those documents. But outside of that, when we talk about things like we'll talk about soon, like data centers, figuring out zoning databases and the NIMBY problem. But along the lines of what Aaron said as well, an unanticipated challenge to this has actually been rolling out web scrapers that allow our stakeholder and community engagement folks to ID those problems and work through them prior to them becoming an actual problem. And so that's really one of the unanticipated challenges, is how much data we're getting in and sorting through all of that in order to be better consultants for our clients.
Thanks. And yeah, I'd love to come back to some of these challenges as well.
Yeah.
But Chris, why don't we move to you a disclaimer, at Kite Compliance, we work with Chris and as a strategic advisor, where he is helping kind of guide some of our thinking about AI tools and whatnot. But Chris, why don't we turn it to you and have you share your work?
Great. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Chris Rodstrom, principal at CVR Energy Solutions. And my background, it's spanning more than about 12 years in several different energy development roles. I started on the utility side, moved into utility scale solar development, spent several years in offshore wind, and then I moved into environmental and permitting consulting and launched my own independent practice last year. And throughout the course of time, I've advised developers on how to navigate regulations and stakeholders and the landscape of both. And really, recently, that means helping them figure out where emerging tools like AI can help and where you still need experience, the experienced human judgment, like Ross was saying. And I think that things are changing fast, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of interest in that. And that's really what brought me to my role as an advisor to Kite. I've been looking deeply at the AI permitting market, looking at where various tools are at, and comparing that to my experience in the development roles in different energy sectors. And I know from experience that energy developers spend a lot of time and money on site selection, permitting assessments, researching other projects. And looking back at that compared to AI, I thought those processes within the developer community could be improved with these new tools. And I started using and evaluating AI tools, including applications designed for permitting, not really as a technology enthusiast, but someone who really wanted to know how and if they work. And, I think one good example is, project siting often involves evaluating 5 or 10 or more potential properties for fatal flaws before you spend money on site control and optioning a property or surveys and engineering. Some developers take the approach of just optioning a whole lot of properties with very little insight or information or insufficient information, and then winnowing that down to just a handful that they develop. But AI, I think, compresses the days or more of manual research into per site into hours, and it allows for developers to evaluate a lot more sites more deeply, more quickly. Now, with all the caveats that Ross raised, and we'll get into, it's that ability to take those manual tasks and speed them up, and free up human judgment to do the thinking and engagement that's needed. That really has me excited.
Great. And I think you've all touched in some way a little bit on um, data quality, the risk of hallucinations, um, and resources. I think that one question I'd love for you guys to weigh in on is how you've thought about structuring, actually like addressing some of those challenges. Is it, there are technical people on the team, there are non-technical people using AI tools. So when you're talking about these web scraping challenges, and I guess for either you, Russ, or you, Aaron, um, what is that collaboration between technical versus non-technical team members to address some of these challenges? Because it requires a little bit of domain expertise as well as the technical expertise.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off here. So, yeah, we have a dedicated team of software engineers that work on this for us at the lab. um, you know, Developing the prompts and standing up the architecture on the back end. You know, uh, I have had some interesting experiences with hallucinations the last couple years, and maybe to Ross's point, I've had some junior staff maybe rely a little heavily on it and not double check the work that's being produced, to my dismay. But what we've done a lot of to try to at least protect against that, and we recognize that, AI, LLMs, they make mistakes. They're going to, continue to make mistakes. And so it's a matter of, what is the threshold that we're comfortable with? And we've gotten our validation efforts over 90% accuracy, and we still do a lot of manual validation. So those same legal interns that I would have spending 1,500 hours doing this type of data collection now maybe are only spending 40 to 80 hours supporting these projects, but still, we will send out our web scraper, have it find documents, and then say reach out to one of our interns and be like, manually search these 100 jurisdictions. We know that the web scraper turned up 40 documents for those 100 jurisdictions. We see, does our human turn up more? Does it turn up less? And then similarly, when we actually extract the data into a machine readable spreadsheet, we also take a sample of those and have the interns go through manually, not knowing what the AI pulled, and fill it out. And then we compare the two results to see both how accurate we were, but also, where can we, add some new prompt engineering to make it even more accurate. And so, in this space, particularly with this Compass project, originally we're collecting model ordinances, things that might come out of a newspaper clipping, et cetera. We were looking for the actual ordinance document. And so having to kind of teach the model to not look for a document that says it's a model document, or not look for a website or a newspaper clipping. And so there is that iterative process to continue to improve the accuracy of these tools. And even with everything we do, I think we recognize that, we're reliant on some of the commercial tools that we prompt engineer on top of. And those tools inherently struggle with some of these issues. And so we're not going to be the one that fixes an issue for OpenAI or Google. We're reliant on them to really address some of these issues. For example, old PDFs with static tables and things like that, can still be a challenge. And you're pulling out numbers from those tables, and they don't line up with what's actually in them. So that type of stuff, we do our best with, and we try to engineer around, but we also recognize that we have some inherent limitations just based off of the commercial products available.
Yeah, and prompt engineering is one of these things where it there's an element where it is technical, another element where it's just understanding the domain. Do you find that kind of those iterations on prompt engineering are being led by the software engineers, or is it by the regulatory team?
So it's more
Um,
by the regulatory team.
yeah.
We're reviewing kind of what data gets pulled and synthesized, and then working with our team to say, hey, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite what we were looking for. We want to avoid this type of document, or we want to refine, how you extract data. And so it is a in hand process, but I think it is guided by the regulatory side of making sure it's the right data for our use. Our software engineers are incredible, but they don't necessarily know the data we're looking for our end uses. And so we have to kind of work with them to inform them of that, even from the start of the process. I mean, we tell them, here are the 20 attributes we're looking for. Say it's, at a local zoning level, we're looking for height restrictions, setback, noise limitations, what zones you can site the project in, et cetera. And so we really guide that. They, as software engineers, create the prompts. We review the outputs, and then we work hand in hand to refine those.
And Ross, you were talking about on your team how you've gone maybe moved past the just purely experimental phase towards working and identifying on specific workflows. How do you think about, I guess, identifying the right workflows to work on, and then also how do you resource that from a engineering uh, your regulatory team perspective?
That is a really, really good question, and it's something we ask ourselves a lot. Apologies to Catherine Scarlett of CEQ for what I'm about to say, but the NEPA process wasn't designed for the pace or scale of today's build out. It just wasn't. And so the first thing that we're having our staff do is attempt to bridge that gap between what NEPA and the federal permitting process can and can't do, and how AI can really fill those holes. So talking about things like document synthesis, like Aaron just said, jurisdictional research, application consistency of, I'm just going to throw out a wild one, the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule for mining. Things like that, and how you can apply those to it. And then we're finding what AI can't help with: political will, interagency coordination culture, NIMBY dynamics. Some tribes still do not want anything to do with it. And so looking at it like that, when we start talking about the overall challenges and how we allocate resources, it really does come down to a discipline by discipline perspective. Our engineering folks are using it in an entirely different way than our NEPA planning folks are using. We're using it an entirely different way than our field folks and cultural resources, who are using it an entirely different way than our natural resources field folks. When you get all of these together, though, and you start looking at the data, what you can see is how it can save time and thereby hopefully decrease your overall permitting cost and schedule if it's used effectively. And the biggest example of that is we were just recently had to pull in an EIS from a solar project that I actually was responsible for when I was at the permitting council. And that document with all of the appendices was about 1,100 pages long. I had one junior analyst analyze that document, provide a readout, and apply it to a new project in less than 3 hours with a solidified pathway. That same amount of work would have taken that analyst 3 or 4 days in the past. So therefore, we got an answer back to the client quicker, who got an answer back to the feds quicker. When you get an answer back to the feds quicker, the feds tend to take the thing at the very top of their inbox. No offense to Aaron, no offense to our Fed friends on the call. I, as a career federal bureaucrat, I know exactly what it's like to walk in on a Monday and you start tackling the email not from the back, but from the front. And so if you look at it like that, you really start to have a really good look at the challenges it's solving. One quick flag though, with tools like Compass, which, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are tracking like 10,000, 11,000 individual US jurisdictions now.
Yeah.
That is flagging what permits are needed in what order and what typical timeframes look like. For consultants who are informing our developers of how long this is going to take and why, that is a gold mine tool. And so the public sector is beating the private sector in the middle here. And for the first time in what I'll say is a very long time, the public and private sectors are looking at this from a single point of view, which is how can we use this to get our projects built quicker, maintain those organic statutes and that underlying environmental stewardship that we have as citizens, while also ensuring the fact that we can move energy projects forward in economical and really efficient timeline.
Yeah.
And just quickly piggybacking off that, I will say that, yeah, this is the most kind of synergy I've seen between the public and the private sector on these issues in my career. We meet with private sector companies all the time that say, hey, we were going to do that, but we don't need to replicate your process. We can use our time and effort elsewhere. We'll use your data sets. And we really do try to create these as open access decision makers support data sets that can be plug and play to different types of tools. And yeah, we've had more of these conversations in the last year than any point in my career with the private sector and how we can support each other.
Yeah. And Ross, you mentioned something that I want to dig in on a little bit deeper, which is the time saving element.
Mhm.
And from your perspective, coming from a consulting firm, I think is very interesting because as I think about consulting firms, I think the business model typically is billable hours. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if there's a tension there and how you've thought about that tension or how your firm has thought about that tension between AI potentially reducing the number of billable hours, but then also being obviously a net positive for the customers. How do you think about the tension to the business model?
We have thought about that in depth. I can't tell you exactly the business model that we are moving forward with into the future, but what I can tell you is that if you get a specific piece of work done quicker in our world, there's always another document that needs to be analyzed, always another document that needs to be done, always another analysis that needs to be completed or reviewed. There's more work than we have to go around. And so when you look at it like that, it's different. And let me back up for a second. In environmental consulting, and I'll say in environmental practitioning as a whole right now, we have a real capacity problem. The demand for permitting services is really outpacing the pipeline of qualified staff. And I use qualified staff in a very unique and directed way right now. AI is a force multiplier in that, not a headcount substitute, and nor do I think it's going to decrease the headcount here at SWCA. Permitting environmental consulting is a people and process business, and the leverage isn't replacing work, it's making your team faster and more consistent. And that's where the benefit of this is coming from. So is there going to be a downstream effect on billable hours and utilization rates? Maybe. I don't know. But what I do know is that when we start looking at things like where we need to be careful, which is also in our bottom line, right? Never letting AI go to an agency or a client without human review is one of them. There's always going to be a need for a human in the loop there. Again, AI is only as good as the documents it's trained or prompted on, garbage in, garbage out. Still going to be a need for a consultant there applying that nuance. The last and probably the largest one that I will harp on for this one is that an over reliance on AI just to decrease your bottom line is going to slow things down in permitting, especially if it reads as generic to agency reviewers as some of the things I've seen AI push out recently. There's a lot of nuance in the federal environmental permitting state, and I'll say the state and local environmental permitting space as well. That all goes together to really start to take a look at the main question here is whether or not AI can actually solve the permitting issue, right? I don't think that AI will solve the permitting issue right away, but it's buying us time while our lawmakers and our rule makers are fixing the real problems. And that is what's most important. So yes, there going to be a downstream effect? Probably. Do we know what that is at this point, at least in our industry? No. That's something that's going to require, I think, more firms like ours, more mid-sized environmental consulting firms to really start embracing this technology and also being transparent with the data that we're coming out of this. I will say we are taking data to potentially put together a research paper on how it's affected us, either decreased or increased utilization rates, all of that good stuff. So from a scientific perspective and a statistical perspective, that's something SWCA is thinking about. While I don't have a direct answer for you right now, I can tell you that there is going to be a downstream effect going forward. We just don't know what that is right now.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Chris, you shared this journey of yours where you started off kind of experimenting and dropping things into ChatGPT and evaluating permitting tools, and now also working in an advisory role with Kite. Can you just tell us about the journey there, what you've learned, and some of the challenges you've encountered?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll use an example that in my experience, mergers and acquisitions is a hugely complex part of it, and I'll use this as kind of a different example from what we've been talking about, where developers are faced with an energy project where they're either selling or buying a portfolio of projects at various stages of completion, with disorganized data rooms, missing permits, some lapsed approvals, some agency correspondence. It's hard to decipher. and a really tight time frame to do that. And so as I started applying AI in little bits on my own, I realized that the first pass on that type of information could be extraordinarily helpful. Processing the information, doing a gap analysis, inventorying documents, and that kind of set the stage for the real thinking work, the kind of harder work. And like for instance, on a substation acquisition I was working on, a very complex site. We definitely needed very experienced attorneys to advise us on some contamination issues. But getting to the point where we were ready to engage the attorneys took a lot of manual work and organizing work, and actually figuring out what the right questions were needed. And so, when I started looking into AI, and then started working with you, Brian, and your team, and kind of dividing up the project life cycle from that very early site selection and review all the way through permit assessments, and then permit prep and submissions, and then tracking stakeholders through the course of that. I started to think about, in each of those phases, where is it that you could speed up and make the process more efficient to get to a stage where kind of your experienced folks could really add the greatest value at the greatest speed. But to Ross's point, I mean, I think there's some resistance in the permitting world, in the development and consultant roles. People are wondering what these tools mean for their jobs, and I get it. And I think we'll come back to that a little bit later. But I think just want to reinforce the point that Ross was making, that you cannot replace human judgment and human experience. But the key might be, how do you develop junior staff who aren't cutting their teeth on these manual tasks to become more seasoned professionals who can, provide a kind of higher level decision making in this AI world. And I think that's something we need to start thinking about.
Yeah. I'd like to actually pull us back a little bit and zoom out. And there's a lot of, headlines these days, people talking about the energy permitting bottleneck and, the data center build out. What are we going to meet that demand with energy? Yes or no? Some of it is like, you hear these comments, half the projects are stuck in red tape. Would love for us to unpack that a little bit and kind of think about that from a macro perspective. And Ross, you were starting to allude to this, so maybe I'll have you kick us off. But like, when people say, "Oh, it's stuck in red tape," what does that really mean? And what is there to do about it?
Yeah, and so I'll use an example that my former political boss under Trump 1.0 had used, which is that federal environmental permitting, particularly the NEPA process, is done in what is usually referred to as a silo or a black box, meaning you don't necessarily have a ton of insight into what your agency counterparts are doing. When we really talk about a bottleneck of energy permitting, it's literally everything you listed. But the regulatory complexity and coordination failures that are inherent within environmental permitting, especially at a federal perspective, are structural. Where that tends to go downhill is when we start talking about, you know what, I'm going to throw it out there, data centers. Let's talk about data centers in particular for 30 seconds here. When you start talking about data centers where you have a core group of issues that are being hounded on every single project, you are able to sort of ID those and start to work through, right? And so the biggest thing for me is, again, speaking specifically about data centers, is community engagement, number one. AI is never going to replace community engagement. But what it does mean is that you stop walking into your rooms blind. You stop walking into your public meetings and your real agency meetings blind. You can analyze public comments from 100 similar projects, understand what those objections are coming in before the first meeting, and tailor your message accordingly. All of those allow a bit more of a transparent permitting process and allow the process to be a little bit more smoother. When we really start talking about the red tape in environmental permitting, it comes from a lack of understanding the process. Permitting is not black and white. Permitting is a very nuanced and gray area. And that is where I really think we start hearing about that red tape. The term red tape, though, just for a little history lesson, truly did come out of the tape that they would wrap the folders in that would have to be cut through for the EPA to start analyzing things before the technological age. Nowadays, that red tape is whether or not the Department of Interior has a large enough file sharing service for us to send our file through that. If we have to email it, put in a Dropbox link or whatever, or some federal agencies are still requiring us to mail in our actual documents. So if you think about it like that, what we mean by there's a bottleneck in energy permitting is all of those things, but it's also the things like resource constraints, whether or not there are enough staff to process things, technological constraints. Can the federal government actually utilize the program you're using to analyze this stuff? Looking at things like the glare and hazard analysis tool that rolled out of PNNL and how we use that on every single glare and glint analysis for solar. Thinking about things like the overall process in which a Section 7 consultation is done, where it does have a solidified timeline in law. However, it's never met because there are always nuanced processes to take place. So thinking about it like that, the red tape now is less the actual tape and more of a culmination, or we'll call it an amalgamation of a dozen different things meeting in the middle when you are halfway through your permitting process for your project, just entering NEPA and going, wait a minute, what do you mean I need to consult with NPS over a plaster elephant on the shore of Wildwood, New Jersey? Chris, that's a direct one that I'm taking from one of your projects. Or what do you mean I have to consult with Forest Service over a potential jurisdictional boundary that's outside of the national forest? So thinking about it, things like that, a lot of why we say the permitting process is a black box or it is convoluted or there's a lot of red tape is that not a lot of people actually understand the permitting process. And even those that do understand that it can't be looked at as a black and white problem. And so that's really the thing.
Okay, great. And Aaron, when you hear that, there's the tape that's mentioned, there's like the transparency of the process, there's also political opposition that's discussed. How, from your perspective, where do you identify the bottleneck, and what do you think can be done from
Yeah,
about it?
I think Ross hit on a number of them. I think one in terms of just AI as a support tool, when you think about, federal resources, staffing resources, the money they have to do this work. We've been hearing for years and years and years it's not enough, and now we have more projects to review than we've had in the past. So I think that is again an area where you still want a human decision maker in the process, but if AI tools can support those human decision makers at the federal level, particularly, and I'm sure we see a lot of this. I work a lot with the federal government, state governments, local governments. I think they all have similar resource constraints and availability of their staff. And so having these support tools, hopefully that is something that helps cut red tape from a standpoint of maybe you don't need 10 extra bodies in your office if you do have some AI tools that can support the decision makers you do have. That's one. Another one that I'd flag that I don't know if AI itself solves. I think technology certainly can help with, and we've supported some projects in this respect is just the multi-jurisdictional nature of a lot of these energy infrastructure projects. And you're dealing with the federal government, state governments, local governments. There's lots of handoffs and coordination that needs to occur between those. And I don't know if necessarily AI itself is the solution to those. I do think that technology is part of that solution, though, creating a central location to upload your documents and your data to, allowing these various agencies to download that data, coordinate through these type of platforms. One example of this that's been done at the Department of Energy is the SIDAP tool for coordinating transmission of authorizations. And so that's a tool that is, was put in place in furtherance of a congressional amendment to the Federal Power Act to add a new section for DOE to be the lead environmental review agency for these qualifying transmission projects. But the platform that's been developed to support it allows 9 federal agencies, state agencies, tribal entities, which I will say have maybe had a more apprehension than the other entities in using a data platform like this. particularly with any sort of sensitive data that they might be sharing as part of NHPA processes and cultural and historic reviews. But we've seen a lot of agencies brought into a single platform where they can download the same data, they can upload their feedback, they can coordinate amongst themselves. And so that's not necessarily AI pushed, but it is technology pushed. And I think there's AI components. Again, if you want to help analyze the comments you're receiving, if you want to help even internally from all the federal agencies and state and local counterparts that are participating, I think again, support tools is a role for AI there, but I think technology is certainly something that we need to see more of. And I know that the CEQ, through their Permitting Technology Action Plan, is really pushing that type of consistency across the federal system in terms of data standards, what tools can do, and hopefully that helps reduce some of this red tape further.
Building off that, Brian, real quick, there are tools that our lawmakers have put into place. Fast 41, obviously I'm biased as one of the first employees there. I'm extremely biased against the whole program or for the whole program, but it's not enough. And what's happening are things like the Speed Act and things like the Certain Act and the E-Permit Act are fantastic in theory, but without the direct input of those individuals that are on the ground practicing, doing this work day to day, we are still going to get the same tired results that we do from our lawmakers every time. And that's where AI certainly can help. AI can definitely bridge that gap between the practitioner aspect of this, the law aspect, and really serve as a good partner in that as well.
Yeah, just as a PSA for all the people listening, we have a couple more questions. I do want to reserve time for Q&A. So if there are questions from the audience, please feel free to drop them in and we'll make sure to handle them. So yeah, kind of last topic, and then we'll do some rapid fire questions and then Q&A. But the last topic I have is, I think in your respective positions, you all get approached by different startups and you hear pitches and solutions, new innovations. And curious to just kind of get your read of call it the startup scene, the innovation scene today. What patterns do you notice? Are you optimistic? Are you bullish? What's missing? What do they get right? Just, it's a kind of a series of questions, but would love for you guys to react to that.
Yeah, I'll take that first. So let me talk about what I've seen startups getting right first, which is the way they're ingesting documents. 100%, it's almost always on par. The second part of that is there's almost always a user interface that feels familiar to the non-technical users of tech, some of these older practitioners that might be using this. And there's always new and novel updates to the program. That being said, what is consistently missing across 99% of these startups is the fact that they don't understand the workflow. So who hands off what to whom, what triggers what. They build this tech before talking to enough practitioners. They'll pull one or two consultants in, one or two developers, one or two former feds, and they think that they get the full really view of the problem. Second is solving the research problem when the real bottleneck is actually submission and the agency response loop. I can't tell you how many times we've been stuck in an agency response loop or how many times I have put developers or project sponsors into a response loop. And then the final one is most of the time from startups, what I'm seeing is that their demos work on clean PDFs that they're able to pull from anywhere. But as something Aaron brought up, really they're failing on real world scan documents. So let's say I'm going to use a wild one, Michigan MDOT Aeronautics. They do not publish almost anything on clean Section 508 compliant because they don't have to be 508 compliant documents. It's almost always scanned in from a third party. PDFs can't read those, which means that a majority of the large language models cannot read those. And that's where a lot of the AI startups are really getting it wrong in this space.
Chris or Aaron, would you guys care to weigh in?
Yeah, just piggyback a little bit off of Ross. I think where I've seen maybe some shortfalls is just on the subject matter expertise. I think they bring on software engineers, they can develop these tools, but are those tools actually doing what is needed by the practitioners in these spaces? And sometimes I felt like they develop a tool and then they showcase it and be like, hey, you should use this. And they're missing more of that feedback loop to them in terms of what is needed, what is the actual workflow. Again, I don't fault them for trying, but I do think that a lot of these companies could benefit from more in-house specialized regulatory expertise for the sectors that they're trying to support to make sure they're meeting their potential clients where they need to.
Yeah. And yeah, I'd just add that I think a lot of the startups, I think we're currently tracking about 22 AI permitting tools that I've been looking at. I think they've diagnosed the problem pretty well. I think that the document ingestion, like Ross was saying, I think is done pretty well. I think where it doesn't necessarily match up with what developers might be looking for is how a portfolio of projects at different stages are organized within the team, the development team, and how the tool is kind of advancing projects and the intelligence that supports that uh, in line with kind of current practices. Just as an example, sometimes information coming in on an early stage energy development project is it's coming in lots of different directions and different formats and scales, and it's just kind of organized on a common shared drive somewhere, and it's kind of a jumble. And then you get multiple projects kind of being developed in parallel, and just the organization challenge of keeping all that information straight is tough enough. And how an AI tool that's designed to improve permitting kind of can help solve that, but also fits within that existing framework of how the development team is talking to the engineering team and talking to the finance team and the external affairs team. And um, you know, I think that I think the insight into how different developers are structured and how the tool can be serving uh, a bunch of different groups within the large organization efficiently and help solve problems like that, you know, keeping a standard record of information that's being used and processed to reach certain decisions about investment decisions or kind of a go no go decision on projects. I think that kind of insight would help build tools that really fit with kind of the developer mindset and approach.
Great. Yeah, and just to share very briefly the perspective and I think the learning that we've had at Kite, I think that we've found that for the most part, developers are not looking to purchase software. They're looking to purchase expertise for how to demystify that black box, and that can be enabled by AI. But truly, we've leaned into a services first, expert led model, and I think that resonates with the market. All right, we're going to move into rapid fire questions. We'll do it alphabetically. So we'll have Aaron, Chris, Ross answer. And please keep these answers short. But this should be fun. First question I've got for you guys. The projections for data center build out are insane. Do you believe them? Yes or no? And we'll start with Aaron and move to Chris and Ross.
I think that there is certainly some speculation there. I mean, but that is not unique to data centers. I mean, we've seen that with wind and solar. When we saw build out, we'd see large interconnection queues build out for those technologies, and a number of projects fall out of those queues over time. I think we're seeing something, similar with data centers. I think the biggest difference to me is the number of large, multinational corporations in this space, and I do tend to put more credence behind some of those projects that have a lot of money behind them and are less speculative. So, I think we're going to see a large build out of these, particularly by the tech companies to support the Googles, the Metas, et cetera, of the world. But I do think there's some speculation in there, and so maybe the targets are a little bullish now, but I certainly anticipate we're seeing, the first time we've seen load increase in decades is real, and we do need more generation. That's the other thing with data centers that I'll flag is it's not just the data center itself, it's how do you power the data center as well. And so needing that new capacity for generation to come on with that data center really doubles that problem. So.
Yeah, I think I'd say yes with some serious caveats. I think the AI is proving itself, as this discussion is kind of covered, in its value and its ability to increase productivity and to address certain things with limitations. So that is going to fuel, I think, a demand for more use, and we're in a digital economy. I mean, everything we do, and our smartphones and streaming service, everything is digital and requires data centers. Where I'd put the caveat is I'm not sure that the edge data centers, the smaller data centers near population centers where latency is a real issue, is being kind of understood at as well, or maybe as forecast as well as maybe the larger learning data centers, the mega centers. So the edge data centers, I think, is one place where it's going to be very fascinating to see how much is built out in smaller scale in closer proximity to the users.
As somebody that lives in Northern Virginia, I tend to have a little bit of a unique view on this. My my answer on the projections are that they are probably overstated in the short run, understated in the long run, and that the build out for those projectors is going to be quite lumpy and not linear. That being said, tacking off one thing Aaron said and one thing Chris said, power is a major problem. Our energy bills in Northern Virginia have gone up, and now we're searching for ways to get gas turbines in and get the pipelines built to serve these data centers. Second to that is what Chris just brought up. Hyperscalers have an advantage right now. Hyperscalers definitely have an advantage because they're leasing the space as it comes online. Where we're starting to see the slowdown is through moratoria, through legislation, and through court orders. That is going to have a much larger effect. And the best example I can give of that is in Chris Next in the Wood in Lowell, Massachusetts. On a Thursday, they voted unanimously to approve the project.
Yeah.
By Saturday, they hold a special session, and there was a 364-day moratorium. 364 days is very, 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 very unique, though, because they can't do it for a year, but they did it for as close as they possibly could. And so if you factor all that into it, I think that we are seeing overstated numbers in the short term, but I think in the long term, this is not a bubble. This is something that the United States, from an economic and national security standpoint, must continue to build out. And I think that we're going to start seeing, probably over the next 5 years to 10 years, it become commonplaces, just like gas pipelines and solar farms in the United States.
Great. And tied to all of this, when you're looking at these forecasts and staffing forecasts for your firms, do you believe that we're going to meet the demand for more power on Earth or in space? I think you hear these interviews where Elon Musk says the red tape is so significant and so daunting that we're bound to go to space because there's less red tape there. So space or no space, Aaron?
I think it's a great idea and something that certainly warrants some research and development, but maybe I'm a little less bullish on any sort of near-term space generation. I mean, quite frankly, we have a terrible transmission grid in our own country and across the world that we haven't been able to figure out yet, let alone transmitting power from space and getting it to everywhere we need it. So, I think that, for the foreseeable future, we're going to be looking for ground-mounted installations, large pieces of flat land in industrial or rural areas where you can site generation infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd say yes, definitely, but not in my professional lifetime, thankfully.
And I'll tack onto that and say definitely terrestrial for the foreseeable future. The physics and latency of space just don't work for most use cases yet. And as somebody that's a huge proponent of Starlink, I have one mounted on my truck. I love it, but it can't beat the hardwired latency that I'm getting from a data center 15 blocks away, which is about 2 milliseconds. Once we can figure out the latency issue, I think that we really start to see a bigger push for it. From an American standpoint, I have serious concerns about doing that and the geopolitical implications of that. However, we need to utilize every perspective we have here. I think that it is something that can become mainstream, but it's just not there from a physics and technological perspective quite yet.
And then last question, unless we have anything come in from the audience, the last question for today is just, what is the unique point of view that each of you would like to leave with the audience with today?
Yeah, happy to start. For me, I think it's that we're very bullish on the use of AI, but I caution that we still need the human expertise, and that I think that ultimately marrying AI tools with some of that human subject matter expertise, particularly in the near term, maybe next 5 to 10 year horizon, is still needed. You know, I will say that I was kind of cynical of where AI would be at this point, and I've been proven wrong. So, who knows what AI can do? Who knows what kind of humanoid robots we're going to have roaming the planet in the next 5 to 10 years? And so I don't want to speculate too far out, but I think in the near term, my big takeaway is AI is great as a support tool. We still need humans engaged in these processes.
Yeah, I'll go. I think I'd like to kind of echo a couple of points about the value and irreplaceability of human judgment, human interaction. I think the value actually of kind of personal interaction, sitting in front of a planning board meeting in a public open house, engaging with the butters, that's never been more important. I mean, I've been on projects, Vineyard Wind just got built, but it took 10 years. And, the amount of public opposition to that and misinformation out there was strong. So having the public, having the human part of permitting is never going away. I do want to kind of raise the point, though, that as AI tools are integrated into consulting firms and developers and government, that question of having experience, hands-on experience, so that you've got seasoned people who can evaluate the output and provide that oversight, but maybe not coming up through the ranks like people have been doing for decades. That I think is kind of a workforce question, like a transition question that I don't have the answers, but I think that's part of some of the resistance of adoption of AI among certain groups. But I think that needs to be thoughtfully planned out so that we can take full advantage of these tools, but still have good quality human judgment on what's coming out and how it's applied.
And I think I'll tack on to what both of them said by saying the conversation kind of always lands on process and regulation, but the deeper constraint is what Chris just said, and that's that we're losing institutional knowledge in this field much faster than we're building it. Experienced permitting professionals are retiring. The next generation is inheriting all of this complexity without the context. Everyone wants to use AI to go faster, but the real opportunity with AI is going better, right? The firms and the developers that win with AI will be the ones that use it to encode that institutional knowledge, catch the errors and omissions that stall projects 6 months, a year in, and de-risk that work, not just accelerate it. Speed without quality just moves that failure further downstream. And so I think as practitioners in this world, whether it be on the public or the private sector side, we all have a duty to ensure that this institutional knowledge is either put into these models so that it can learn that, or that we are providing mentorship to the next up and coming generation on how we work through these before reform happens at the legislative level.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate everyone's time. And to everyone who's listening, we'll be sure to share the recording and a little write-up at the end of this. But yeah, thank you for everyone's time. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.